He offered his jacket to a shivering woman at the bus stop, not knowing she was a millionaire CEO who would change his life forever. Could a homeless man's simple act of kindness toward a shivering stranger ignite a war inside a billion-dollar company? When Henry offers his jacket to CEO Claire Evans, it pulls him into a world of corporate conspiracy, but the plot against her hides a shocking technological vulnerability that only he might have the skills to uncover. Subscribe, like, and listen now to hear how deep the rabbit hole goes. In this reckless pattern of behavior, culminating in a misappropriation of corporate philanthropic funds for personal whims, specifically funneling resources toward an unstable vagrant, demonstrates a profound lack of judgment detrimental to Infinity Group's reputation and financial stability. The evidence is clear. The board must act. I move for a vote of no confidence in CEO Claire Evans. The words, delivered with cool precision by Carl Thorne, Chief Operations Officer, echoed in the tense silence of the emergency Infinity Group boardroom. Fluorescent lights glinted off the polished mahogany table, illuminating the stunned or calculating faces of the board members. Cameras at the back, streaming to major shareholders, captured every nuance. Claire Evans stood at the head of the table, ramrod straight, her expression unreadable. Beside her, slightly behind, a man in a borrowed suit, Henry Brooks, watched Thorne, his eyes narrowed, recognizing the same predatory calculation he'd seen too many times on the streets. Thorne placed a sheaf of printouts on the table. These documents detail unauthorized transfers, coded expenditures, all linking back to MS. Evans's personal project involving the individual known as Henry Brooks, whom she installed in this company without due process. Whispers rustled through the room. Stock tickers, visible on side monitors, showed INFG dipping sharply on the news. Claire didn't look at the papers. Her gaze remained fixed on Thorne. The air crackled with tension. Years of building this empire, steering it through tech bubbles and busts, navigating cutthroat competition, all of it threatened by these accusations, by the man she had once considered a colleague, if not a friend. Henry felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was his fault. His presence here, Claire's attempt to help him, twisted into a weapon against her. He saw the smug certainty in Thorne's eyes, the barely concealed triumph. Claire finally moved. She didn't reach for Thorne's documents. Instead, she nodded almost imperceptibly to her head of IT, who stood near the main presentation screen. "Mr. Thorne," Claire's voice cut through the tension, calm and clear, "you speak of evidence. Perhaps we should examine all the evidence." The main screen flickered to life, not with Thorne's doctored financials, but with something else entirely. Something that made Carl Thorne's confident smirk vanish, replaced by a sudden, sickly pallor. What was Claire showing them? What had she discovered? And how was Henry, the vagrant, involved in this corporate endgame? The room held its breath. Rewind 6 months. Henry Brooks' world was confined to a few blocks of downtown Chicago. His address was a grimy alleyway behind a bakery, his bed a nest of scavenged cardboard and newspapers. At 42, his face bore the map of hardship lines etched deep by worry, exposure, and a gnawing ache of loss. 5 years ago, Henry had been a senior systems architect at a leading engineering firm, with a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a respectable life. Then the 2019 tech downturn hit his sector hard. Layoffs cascaded, and his job evaporated. His specialized skills, once highly valued, were suddenly redundant in a flooded market. Unemployment benefits ran out. Savings dwindled. Shame and stress fractured his marriage, leading to divorce and estrangement from his children. One bad break after another, a brief illness that drained his last reserves. Eviction led him inexorably downwards until the street became his only option. His days were a relentless cycle of survival. Finding food, usually a meal at St. Jude's Soup Kitchen. Finding shelter from Chicago's brutal weather. Avoiding trouble, whether from desperate addicts, aggressive panhandlers, or the police moving him along. His only remaining possessions of value were intangible. His sharp, analytical mind, honed by years of complex problem-solving, and a stubborn spark of dignity that refused to be extinguished. He spent hours in the public library, not just for warmth, but to read technical journals, trying to keep his skills from rusting away completely, clutching onto the ghost of the man he used to be. He rarely spoke to anyone beyond curt necessities. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His desire wasn't for wealth, but simply for stability, for a chance to reclaim a fraction of his lost life, maybe even reconnect with his kids someday. The world Henry inhabited existed in the shadows of the gleaming towers of corporate Chicago, like the imposing Infinity Group headquarters. Infinity Group was a tech behemoth, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate specializing in AI, data analytics, and cutting-edge communications technology. Its CEO, Claire Evans, was something of a legend, taking over after her father's sudden death 10 years ago and steering the company to unprecedented growth. She was known for her sharp intellect, demanding standards, and, among the public, a carefully cultivated image of approachable philanthropy. Inside Infinity Group, however, tensions simmered. Claire's rapid ascent and sometimes unconventional methods bred resentment in some corners. Carl Thorne, the ambitious OO, felt overlooked, believing he should have been the successor. He represented the old guard, favoring ruthless efficiency and shareholder value above all else. He saw Claire's occasional focus on corporate social responsibility or employee well-being initiatives as frivolous distractions, potential weaknesses to be exploited. The corporate atmosphere was fiercely competitive, data-driven, and results-oriented. Mistakes weren't tolerated, and loyalty was often secondary to ambition. Henry knew nothing of this world, though he slept practically in its shadow. His reality was the biting wind off Lake Michigan, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, the constant, wearying vigilance required to simply exist from one day to the next. He was invisible to the men and women in expensive suits hurrying past him, lost in their own worlds of deadlines and deals. He was just another piece of the city's grim scenery, a problem most preferred to ignore. Until one freezing night, an act of simple, unexpected kindness pierced the barrier between these two vastly different worlds. The cold bit deep that November night, even for someone like Henry who claimed to be used to it. A raw wind whipped down LaSalle Street, carrying flurries of snow that stung his exposed skin. He was huddled in the relative shelter of a bus stop enclosure. Waiting not for a bus, he had nowhere to go, and no fare money anyway, but simply for a brief respite from the wind. He clutched the thin fabric of his worn, army surplus jacket, his only real barrier against the encroaching chill. Then he saw her, standing just outside the enclosure, shivering uncontrollably. She wore a sleek, dark dress, elegant, expensive, and utterly inadequate for the weather. Her blonde hair was coming undone, whipped across her face by the wind. She hugged a small, equally elegant handbag to her chest, her bare arms covered in goosebumps. She looked lost, vulnerable, and dangerously unprepared for the elements. Maybe her car broke down. Maybe she had a fight. Henry didn't know or care about the specifics. He only saw someone in immediate, obvious distress. Without a second thought, driven by an instinct he hadn't realized he still possessed, Henry shrugged off his own jacket. It wasn't much patched, faded, probably smelled of alleyways and despair, but it was warm. He stepped out into the wind and gently draped it over her shoulders. She gasped, startled, her wide blue eyes meeting his. They were surprisingly clear, intelligent eyes, despite her current state. "Here," Henry mumbled, avoiding her gaze, suddenly self-conscious of his ragged appearance. "You need this more than I do. I'm used to the cold." The woman clutched the jacket, pulling it tighter. The immediate relief on her face was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, whether from cold or emotion, he couldn't tell. "That's incredibly kind." Before she could say more, before the awkwardness could fully register, Henry turned and walked away, melting back into the swirling snow and shadows. He didn't want thanks, didn't want questions, didn't want the inevitable pity or dismissal. He'd done what felt right, a fleeting spark of his old self surfacing. Now, he needed to find shelter before the real cold set in, jacket or no jacket. He burrowed deeper into the alley behind the bakery, the familiar rough brick against his back offering little comfort against the intensifying chill. He pushed the shivering woman from his mind. Just another fleeting encounter in a life defined by transience. His initial goal was simply survival, unchanged by the night's event. He didn't expect to ever see her again. His reaction was purely instinctual compassion, followed by a swift retreat into his own isolated world. He curled tighter against the cold, pulling his knees to his chest, unaware that this small, selfless act had set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter his desolate existence. He had offered his only protection to a stranger, expecting nothing, oblivious to the fact that he had just shielded the CEO of one of Chicago's most powerful corporations, a woman who now held his threadbare jacket, and a newfound determination to understand the man who gave it to her. Claire Evans stood frozen at the bus stop for a moment after the man disappeared, clutching the surprisingly heavy, worn jacket around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and city grime, but it was undeniably warm. The sheer, unexpected kindness of the gesture, from someone who clearly had so little, struck her profoundly. She, who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, felt humbled. She'd been heading home after a charity gala, but got into a heated argument with her COO, Carl Thorne, via text about a community initiative she was pushing. Frustrated by his accusations of being out of touch, she'd impulsively dismissed her driver blocks away, intending to walk and take public transport to clear her head, forgetting her own coat in her anger. A foolish, privileged move that left her shivering and stranded until this ragged stranger intervened. Finding him became an immediate priority. It wasn't just about returning the jacket. It was about understanding the impulse behind his act. She tasked her head of security, Mike Chun, a discreet and highly efficient former FBI agent, with locating him. He was at the LaSalle and Adams stop, around 9:15 p.m. Tuesday, she instructed. Tall, maybe early 40s, wearing this jacket. She handed Mike the garment. It took Chen's team 3 days. Cross-referencing traffic camera footage, tracking the distinctive jacket's movements through the city surveillance network, they finally pinpointed Henry Brooks, identifying him through facial recognition matched against old public records from his previous life. They found him sleeping in his usual alley spot. Claire received the file. Henry Brooks, former systems architect, divorced, homeless for nearly 2 years. His story resonated with her, a victim of industry shifts she herself navigated from the top. Claire decided to approach him directly, rejecting Chen's offer of sending security. She found Henry lining up at St. Jude's Soup Kitchen, dressed down in jeans and a simple sweater. She waited until he had his tray, then approached him quietly. "Mr. Brooks?" "Henry." He looked up, startled, suspicion instantly clouding his eyes. Recognition dawned slowly as he saw her. "I believe this is yours," Claire said softly, holding out his jacket, now cleaned and neatly folded. Henry flushed, embarrassment warring with distrust. "Keep it," he mumbled, looking away. "You needed it." "Thank you. But I want to thank you properly," Claire persisted gently. "My name is Claire Evans." Henry stiffened slightly at the name. He wasn't entirely disconnected. He knew who ran Infinity Group. This made the situation even more awkward. Not necessary. Forget about it. He clearly wanted her to leave, uncomfortable under the stares of others in the line. "This isn't pity, Henry," Claire said, sensing his pride. "My security team ran a check. I know who you are, what you used to do. Your background, it's relevant to something I'm working on at Infinity Group." This piqued Henry's interest, overriding his reluctance. "Relevant how?" "We're developing new accessibility protocols for our software platforms," Claire explained, improvising slightly based on his file, but also tapping into a genuine company need. "We need someone with deep systems knowledge, but also a different perspective. Someone who understands barriers. I'd like to offer you a short-term consulting contract. 3 months. Project-based." Henry stared at her, incredulous. A job offer? Here? From her? It sounded too good to be true. "Why me? Plenty of engineers out there." "Maybe," Claire conceded, "but your act that night showed character. And your unique experience might provide insights others lack." Seeing his hesitation, she added the clincher. "As an advanced gesture of goodwill for considering this, Infinity Group will make a significant donation to St. Jude's immediately, enough to upgrade their kitchen facilities." That hit home. St. Jude's was a lifeline. The thought of helping them, combined with the impossible glimmer of a chance to use his skills again, made him waver. His initial goal remained survival, but suddenly a different path, however improbable, presented itself. "A contract?" he asked skeptically. "What exactly would I be doing?" "Analyzing user interface logic, identifying potential friction points for non-traditional users, reviewing system architecture for efficiency gaps," Claire listed, now on firmer ground. "Your reports would come directly to my office." Henry hesitated for a long moment, weighing the risks, the potential humiliation, the sheer strangeness of it all against the undeniable opportunity, not just for himself, but for the soup kitchen. "Okay," he said finally, his voice rough. "Okay, Ms. Evans. I'll consider it." He took the jacket. It felt different now, heavier with possibility. Claire gave him a card with a private number. "Call me tomorrow." She walked away, leaving Henry standing there, stunned, holding his old jacket and a business card that felt like a key to a world he thought he'd lost forever. The first step was taken, but complications were already brewing within the walls of Infinity Group, where news of the CEO's unusual hire was about to reach the ears of a very resentful Carl Thorne. Henry's first few weeks at Infinity Group were a surreal experience. He was given a small, temporary office, access credentials, and a laptop. He mostly kept to himself, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed him down the hallway. He wore clothes bought from a thrift store with the small advance Claire had arranged clean, but still setting him apart from the bespoke suits and designer labels around him. He threw himself into the work, analyzing software architecture diagrams and user flow charts. His mind, long dormant, sparked back to life, finding familiar patterns, identifying subtle inefficiencies, rediscovering the satisfaction of solving complex problems. He produced detailed, insightful reports, impressing Claire and the few engineers he interacted with directly on the project. He used a portion of his advance to secure a room in a modest SRO hotel, a significant step up from the alley. He also made sure Claire followed through on the donation to St. Jude's, visiting the kitchen to see the plans for the new ovens and refrigerators taking shape, feeling a quiet sense of pride. However, his presence was a growing irritant to Carl Thorne. Thorne saw Henry not as a potential asset, but as evidence of Claire's erratic leadership, a symbol of her supposed detachment from core business principles. He began subtly undermining Henry, questioning the value of his contributions in meetings Claire didn't attend, planting seeds of doubt about the CEO's pet project. Thorne also saw an opportunity. Claire's focus on Henry, her apparent soft spot, could be the vulnerability he needed to finally make his move against her. The turning point came during a quarterly review meeting with key department heads. Claire was presenting positive growth figures, but also outlining her plan to allocate a larger budget towards community tech initiatives, including expanding the program Henry was consulting on. Thorne chose this moment to strike, albeit indirectly at first. Claire, Thorne interjected smoothly. While the sentiment is admirable, some department heads have expressed concern about resource allocation. Specifically, dedicating significant engineering time and budget towards unconventional hires and vaguely defined social projects, especially when core product development cycles are already tight. He didn't mention Henry by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Before Claire could respond, another Thorne ally, the head of marketing, chimed in, "There are also optics, Claire. We're a tech leader, not a social services agency. Bringing in individuals with unstable backgrounds, even on a temporary basis, raises security concerns and sends a confusing message to the market." Henry, present to provide a brief update on his project's findings, felt the blood drain from his face. He was being discussed like a problem, a liability. He saw Claire's jaw tighten. Claire pushed back calmly but firmly, defending the strategic value of diverse perspectives and the long-term benefits of corporate responsibility. But the seed was planted. Doubt flickered in the eyes of some attendees. Later that day, Claire called Henry into her office. The mood was somber. "They're using you, Henry," she said bluntly. "Carl sees you as a weapon to undermine me. He's framing my decision to hire you as recklessness." It was a harsh confirmation of Henry's fears. He wasn't just an outsider. He was a pawn in a high-stakes corporate power struggle. He could quit, disappear back to the anonymity of the streets, and Claire would likely weather the storm eventually. But quitting felt like validating Thorne's narrative, like letting him win. More importantly, Claire had taken a chance on him, given him a lifeline when no one else would. "What do they think I am?" Henry asked quietly, anger simmering beneath his resignation. "A risk," Claire said, "and Carl is going to amplify that risk. I'm hearing whispers, rumors being leaked to financial blogs about mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. He's building a narrative." This was the moment of truth for Henry. He could retreat, or he could stand his ground, not just for himself, but for Claire. He looked at the complex network diagrams still open on his borrowed laptop, the intricate flow of data within Infinity Group. His engineering mind started connecting dots in a different way. Thorne wasn't just using rhetoric. He was likely manipulating information, perhaps even systems. "He's not just talking," Henry said slowly, thinking aloud. "Someone like that, he wouldn't rely just on rumors. He'd create proof." He realized the danger was far greater than office politics. Thorne was actively trying to sabotage Claire, and Henry was caught in the crossfire. His role shifted instantly. He wasn't just a consultant trying to regain his footing. He was now potentially Claire's most unlikely ally, someone with a unique perspective both inside and outside the system. "Show me the network architecture again," he said to Claire, his voice gaining strength. Show me where the financial data flows. If he's faking proof, he has to leave tracks. He couldn't go back to his old life, not now. He was committed. This was his fight, too. The midpoint revelation galvanized Henry and Claire. The fight was no longer just about defending Claire's decision to hire Henry. It was about exposing Thorne's active sabotage. Claire, leveraging her authority, granted Henry restricted but necessary access to specific network logs and financial system interfaces under the strict supervision of Mike Chun, her loyal head of security, and the IT director, Sarah Jenkins, a pragmatic woman initially skeptical of Henry, but increasingly impressed by his insights. Henry dove into the data, his analytical skills sharper than ever. He wasn't looking for complex hacks, but for subtle anomalies Thorne might have created, assuming no one would look closely or possess the right expertise. He worked late hours in his small office, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a fierce determination. He felt the weight of Claire's trust and the looming threat Thorne represented. Self-doubt occasionally surfaced. Who was he, a man recently sleeping rough, to challenge a powerful COO in his own domain? But the intellectual challenge, the sense of purpose, and his loyalty to Claire pushed him forward. Their new strategy was twofold. Defensively track Thorne's digital footprint within Infinity Group's systems to anticipate his moves and gather concrete evidence of his wrongdoing, and offensively prepare a counter-narrative for when Thorne inevitably made his public move. Claire, meanwhile, had to maintain a facade of normalcy, managing the company, reassuring nervous board members, and subtly probing Thorne's known allies without revealing her suspicions. The first breakthrough came when Henry, analyzing server access logs for the finance department, noticed unusual activity originating from executive VPN profile belonging to Thorne's top aide. The access times were late at night, targeting specific archive transaction databases that were later referenced in Anonymous, damaging leaks to financial journalists alleging Claire was hiding losses. The aide likely wouldn't act alone. He's using a proxy, Henry explained to Claire and Chun, making it look like a subordinate's work, but the access protocols have Thorne's digital fingerprints if you dig deep enough. Simultaneously, Thorne escalated his attacks. He orchestrated anonymous complaints to the board's ethics committee regarding Henry's unvetted access to sensitive systems. He engineered delays in projects overseen by Claire's allies, making them look incompetent. He fed carefully distorted metrics to specific board members known to dislike Claire's leadership style. The pressure mounted. Infinity Group's stock price wobbled under the onslaught of negative press and rumors. Henry faced his own internal struggles. He was still navigating the social complexities of the corporate world, making occasional gaffes. Some employees, influenced by Thorne's whispers, treated him with suspicion or condescension. He missed the simpler, if harsher, anonymity of the streets sometimes. He reconnected tentatively with his eldest daughter via email, explaining his new situation cautiously, adding another layer of personal stakes. The hope of rebuilding his family life depended on succeeding here. Claire provided unwavering support, meeting with Henry and Chun daily, strategizing, analyzing the fragments of evidence Henry uncovered. They discovered encrypted messages between Thorne and an external IP address known to belong to a notorious corporate espionage firm. They found discrepancies in expense reports filed by Thorne's office, suggesting funds being diverted, possibly to pay for the external attacks. They realized Thorne wasn't just aiming for a vote of no confidence. He was likely planning a final, decisive blow, probably timed for maximum impact, like an emergency shareholder meeting. They needed undeniable proof, something solid to counter Thorne's manufactured evidence. Henry identified a potential vulnerability. Thorne's overconfidence. He seemed to believe his tracks were perfectly covered, relying on standard corporate security protocols that Henry, with his deeper architectural understanding, could see ways around. He's routing his damaging commands through a series of internal virtual machines, trying to anonymize them, Henry explained. But there's a faint data echo left on the primary network gateway if we query it correctly right after he makes a move. Their plan became riskier, more proactive. Let Thorne make his final move, but be ready to capture the digital echo in real time, providing irrefutable forensic proof of his actions. It required perfect timing and nerves of steel. The stage was set for a final confrontation, with Henry, the man Thorne dismissed as a vagrant, holding the key to exposing him. The days leading up to the emergency board meeting, called by Thorne and his faction citing urgent fiduciary concerns, were fraught with tension. Thorne, smelling blood, grew bolder. He leaked heavily redacted, misleading internal emails suggesting Claire had overridden standard procedures to fast-track Henry's access and payments. He scheduled meetings designed to isolate Claire, forcing her to delegate critical decisions, then criticized her apparent disengagement. He knew the vote would be close. He needed to ensure maximum damage just before it happened. Claire, Henry, Mike Chun, and Sarah Jenkins worked almost around the clock in a secure conference room repurposed as a war room. Sarah's IT team set up specialized monitoring tools, focused on the network gateways Henry had identified. Henry, pale with exhaustion but laser-focused, mapped out Thorne's likely digital attack vectors. He'll need to execute the final data manipulation just before the meeting, Henry predicted, planting the definitive proof in the live financial reporting system, timing it so it looks like Claire gets caught red-handed when the quarterly numbers are presented. The personal toll on Henry was immense. He barely slept, living on stale coffee and adrenaline. His tentative reconnection with his daughter stalled. He didn't have the emotional bandwidth to explain the chaos engulfing him. He felt the immense pressure if he failed, Claire would fall, and he'd likely be scapegoated, losing the fragile foothold he'd regained. This was his ultimate test. Could the skills he honed designing systems for corporations now be used to save one from internal corruption? Claire faced her own dark night of the soul. Board members she'd trusted for years were wavering, swayed by Thorne's relentless campaign. The company she'd poured her life into felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She questioned her judgment in bringing Henry into this viper's nest, exposing him to such danger. But seeing Henry's unwavering focus, his quiet determination grounded in logic and data, strengthened her resolve. They had to see this through. Mike Chun handled external threats, ensuring physical security and running counter-surveillance against Thorne's likely PS. Sarah Jenkins prepped her team for rapid forensic analysis the moment Henry gave the signal. The plan was set. Let Thorne access the system, let him plant his fake data, and capture the immutable logs of his intrusion via the gateway monitoring. The night before the meeting, Thorne took the bait. Henry, watching the monitors intently, saw the specific signature of the attack vector activate. "He's in," Henry breathed, fingers flying across his keyboard, initiating the deep packet capture on the designated gateway. Alarms, silent except in their war room, flashed as Thorne's malware burrowed into the live financial database, altering key figures, inserting fabricated transaction records implicating Claire's office, specifically routing dummy payments towards shell accounts linked tenuously to ST. Jude's the proof of Claire embezzling funds for Henry. For 10 agonizing minutes, they watched Thorne's digital ghost move through the system. Then it withdrew. "Got it," Sarah confirmed, securing the logs. Time-stamped, encrypted. The intrusion signature points directly back to the VPN assigned to Thorne's office, bypassing standard protocols through an exploit only someone with high-level architectural knowledge would know. They worked through the rest of the night, preparing the presentation. Not just the logs, but cross-reference financial analyses showing the actual healthy state of the company, documentation of Thorne's previous attempts at disinformation, and records of his suspicious communications. Claire prepared her statement, calm and resolute. Henry, despite his exhaustion, felt a surge of adrenaline. Tomorrow, in that boardroom, the truth would come out one way or another. The final confrontation was imminent. The atmosphere in the Infinity Group boardroom was electric. Shareholders watched remotely, the stock price volatile. Board members sat stiffly. Carl Thorne, radiating confidence, stood to deliver his indictment. He laid out his case with practiced precision, presenting the manipulated printouts, citing the altered figures, painting Claire as incompetent and corrupt, using her support for Henry as the linchpin of her alleged recklessness. A clear pattern of mismanagement and misappropriation, Thorne concluded, his voice ringing with false sincerity. For the good of the company, the board must remove MS. Evans immediately. The evidence speaks for itself. All eyes turned to Claire. Henry stood nearby, a silent presence. Claire didn't flinch. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice steady, "you speak of evidence. Let's look at the real evidence." She nodded to Sarah Jenkins. The main screen lit up, but not with Thorne's documents. Instead, Sarah projected network logs. "At 23:47 last night," Sarah explained calmly, "an unauthorized intrusion accessed the live financial database via an executive VPN, specifically the one assigned to Mr. Thorne's office." She highlighted lines of code, timestamps. The intrusion utilized a known exploit to bypass security protocols and alter specific data, the exact fields Mr. Thorne has presented as evidence. A shocked murmur filled the room. Thorne's face went slack, disbelief warring with panic. "This is absurd. Fabricated. My systems were compromised." "Were they?" Claire countered smoothly. "Because the exploit used requires intimate knowledge of legacy architecture patches implemented 5 years ago, knowledge readily available to senior executives like yourself, Mr. Thorne, but not widely documented." She then displayed communications logs, encrypted but metadata-rich, showing Thorne's contact with a corporate espionage firm. Finally, she presented evidence of offshore bank accounts opened in Thorne's name, receiving substantial payments coinciding with negative leaks about Infinity Group. The forensic evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Thorne's carefully constructed narrative crumbled. He sputtered denials, but the data didn't lie. Board members who had been wavering now looked at Thorne with dawning horror and disgust. "Security," Claire said quietly. Mike Shin stepped forward with 2 uniformed officers. Thorne, cornered and exposed, lunged towards the table, perhaps to grab the logs, perhaps simply lashing out, but Shin intercepted him effortlessly. As Thorne was escorted out, shouting threats and accusations, the room fell silent, stunned by the swift, brutal takedown. Claire stood tall, having weathered the storm. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He caught Claire's eye. She gave him a small, grateful nod. The immediate threat was neutralized, the truth laid bare by data, diligence, and an unlikely alliance forged at a bus stop. The immediate aftermath of the boardroom confrontation was decisive. With Thorne removed and facing federal investigation for fraud and corporate espionage, Claire quickly consolidated support among the chastened board. She presented the actual strong financial data, outlined her strategic vision, including the community initiatives, and received a unanimous vote of confidence. The news, accompanied by a carefully worded press release detailing Thorne's attempted sabotage and Claire's decisive action, stabilized Infinity Group stock, which began a steady recovery. Henry Brooks became a quiet hero within the company. Claire publicly acknowledged his crucial role in uncovering Thorne's plot, not framing him as a hacker, but as a skilled analyst whose unique perspective allowed him to spot anomalies others missed. She offered him a permanent position, senior analyst in a newly formed internal audit and systems integrity division, reporting directly to her office. He accepted. Life changed dramatically for Henry, but gradually. He moved into a modest apartment, reconnecting properly with his children, who were tentatively proud of their father's unexpected comeback. He never lost the humility forged during his time on the streets, often visiting St. Jude's, not just as a benefactor's representative, but as someone who understood. He channeled his experiences and technical skills into leading a pro bono project within Infinity Group, developing the Connect and Nourish app, a platform efficiently linking restaurants with surplus food to nearby shelters and soup kitchens. The app gained significant traction in Chicago and other cities, becoming a tangible symbol of Infinity Group's renewed commitment to meaningful social impact. Henry and Claire's relationship evolved into a deep, abiding friendship and partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. There were no grand romantic gestures, but a quiet understanding and reliance grew between them. They often met at the same bus stop where their paths first crossed, sometimes just to talk, reflecting on how far they'd both come. Claire established the Brooks Warmth Fund, endowed by Infinity Group, and her personal wealth, dedicated to providing transitional housing, job training, and mental health support for the homeless, with a specific focus on skilled professionals displaced by economic shifts. Henry served as its chief advisor, ensuring its programs were practical and compassionate. Standing at the fund's launch event, Henry looked out at the crowd, a mix of city officials, tech professionals, and residents from the shelters the fund supported. He wasn't the same man who had huddled in alleys just months before, nor the high-flying engineer from years ago, but someone new, shaped by loss, redeemed by kindness, and empowered by purpose. Claire stood beside him. "You gave me a coat when I was cold," she murmured. He smiled. "You reminded me I still had something worth giving." Their journey, sparked by a simple act of kindness, hadn't just changed their lives. It had begun to reshape the soul of a corporation, proving that empathy and expertise could, indeed, change the world.